members, Reverend Kim, friends, neighbors, good morning. And thank you, Jim, for the introduction. My military service was relatively short. There certainly are other veterans in the area, probably here today, who have longer service and distinguished service. Therefore, I'm very honored and humbled that Jim asked me to make a few remarks. Jim is a veteran, Vietnam veteran, who served honorably there in the late 60s. Thank you, Jim, for your service. And although Jim already mentioned it, Bill Wingard, who served as a Navy corpsman and who initiated this memorial service 39 years ago, thank you again. Memorial Day is a day of remembrance and respect for those who have died in the service of our country. The day was originally called Decoration Day, and it was born out of the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. On May 30th, 1868, General James Garfield gave the first speech at Arlington National Cemetery, where 5,000 people decorated the graves of 20,000 Union and Confederate soldiers. It was not until after World War I when the day was changed to honoring Americans who died in all wars. 1.1 million Americans have died in all the wars, U.S. wars, 750,000 in the Civil War alone. Today coincides with the 100th anniversary of the birthday of John F. Kennedy. You are well aware that in his January 20th, 1961 inaugural address, he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Well, those we remember today made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. 5 months later, in June 1961, President Kennedy was the commencement speaker at my graduation. 2 years later, on November 22nd, 1963, at the age of 46, he made the ultimate sacrifice in Dallas. Today is about remembering. Many of us have a personal connection to someone who has died in the service of our country. It could be a parent, brother, sister, classmate, grandparent, or just a good friend. That's why we're all gathered here this morning in our beautiful town by the sea to honor, thank, and remember them. Among those I remember today are 21 classmates of mine at the Naval Academy who died in the service of our country. The first two, less than 2 years after graduation, were on the nuclear sub Thresher, which sank in April 1963 off the Cape Cod coast while it was undergoing deep dive tests. 129 men died. Their remains have never been recovered. It's the single largest submarine loss of life ever. 9 of my classmates were killed in Vietnam, 5 naval aviators and 4 Marines. It is my honor and privilege today to acquaint you with the much too short resume of one of those naval aviators, my 20th company classmate and friend, James J. Connell. On July 15, 1966, his A-4E Skyhawk was launched off the USS Ranger on a mission to attack a surface-to-air missile site south of Hanoi. He was shot down, he was captured. While a prisoner, Jim established and maintained covert communications among changing groups of POWs. When our POWs were repatriated 7 years later in 1973, Jim was not among them. Reportedly, he had died in captivity 2 years before. His remains were returned in 1974. For his extraordinary heroism as a POW, Jim was awarded the Navy Cross, which is the highest Navy award for valor short of the Medal of Honor. During our senior year, he made a very unique and lasting contribution to the Naval Academy. Our curriculum was very heavy in math, science, engineering. Jim recognized that military leaders also needed something else. They needed to have a good understanding of foreign affairs and international relations. And he and a few professors gave that vision life by launching the first Naval Academy Foreign Affairs Conference. in April of 1961, 2 months before we graduated. The conference continues today, and it's the largest undergraduate foreign affairs conference in the United States. Attendees include student representatives from 30 nations. I'm pleased to also note that during a reunion of my classmates here in Spring Lake 9 years ago, a former submariner said, "Gee, why don't we ask the Academy to name the conference's opening address after Jim?" The Academy agreed, our class raised the funds, and thanks to an idea conceived here in Spring Lake, Jim will be remembered and his story and sacrifice told for years to come as part of the Lieutenant Commander J.J. Connell opening keynote address. While this day is to remember those military members who died in the service of our country, my thoughts and prayers also go to others. First, our wounded warriors. Certainly a part of their bodies and their minds died from a battle injury or a wartime experience. Tragically, more than 20 veterans commit suicide every day. May 1 is designated Silver Star Service Banner Day, a day to honor our wounded warriors, our wounded, ill, and dying military personnel. Seeing the Iwo Jima monument behind me, I think of my uncle Tommy Breslin, a Navy corpsman assigned to the Marines who was at Iwo Jima, and I'm convinced suffered his whole life from what he experienced in the South Pacific Islands. Dr. John Tazi, I don't know if Dr. Tazi is here today, but his dad and Kathy Heine's uncle, they were at Iwo Jima as well. Second, the families of those who died or who were seriously wounded. It has been said that no one has given more for the nation, to the nation, than the families of the fallen. September 24th is designated Gold Star Mothers and Family Day. And third, the police, the firefighters, the emergency medical personnel who have lost their lives or who have been seriously injured in terrorist attacks against our country, 9/11 being the most notable. As the nature of war changes with technology such as drones and cyber warfare, I'm hopeful there will be much less loss of life in the future. But unfortunately, we know the number will never be zero. And our personal connections to people who died will be fewer and fewer. However, we must continue to remember all who have died to keep us free. Sadly, today it's estimated that only 1 in 4 Americans know the real meaning of Memorial Day. So it's up to us to keep this holiday for much more than just being a celebration of a long, fun-filled weekend that starts the summer. Small towns like Spring Lake, everyone here, we hold the important responsibility to mark and remember the real meaning, to honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice in the service of our country. I'm confident that our Spring Lake tradition will continue, thanks to the commitment of the current and future mayors and council, Jim Lonsdale, Kathy Heine, and the people who follow them. I see some friends who are veterans here, friends of mine who are veterans. Some served in Vietnam. I want to thank them and all the veterans standing here today for their service. I want to mention, I'm not sure he's here, I know his father is here, but I want to recognize one local serviceman who just completed 6 years of active duty. Matt Cavalier, Captain, United States Marine Corps, including a tour in Afghanistan. Thank you everyone for coming, and may God continue to bless this great country of ours.
Thank you.
This portion of the ceremony is called the reading of the wreath.